You are listening to this video, and at this very moment, your brain is quietly deciding whether to stay or leave. It feels like a simple choice. But behind that feeling, a silent storm of neural activity is unfolding. Billions of cells are weighing signals, comparing options, and shaping a direction long before you consciously think, "I choose this." We like to imagine decisions as acts of pure intention. I choose this, not that. I turn left, not right. Yet the brain is a biological organ, following physical rules, while producing something that feels personal, deliberate, and meaningful. So a deeper question appears: how does a small, soft structure of about 1.5 kilograms turn electrical and chemical signals into preferences, plans, and impulses that feel like ours? And when two options sit in front of us, what is the hidden process that decides which one rises above the rest? You might wonder, what exactly are we trying to uncover? We want to understand how the brain turns information from the world and from the body into a choice that feels smooth, natural, and often effortless. Most people make thousands of decisions each day, yet almost none of them feel remarkable. You choose what to eat, where to look, and how fast to walk, all while your brain filters more information than any device humanity has ever built. This ordinary flow hides a long scientific journey that stretches from early philosophy to modern laboratories. Centuries ago, thinkers tried to explain choice through reason alone, imagining the mind as something separate from the physical world. Today, researchers sit in rooms filled with quiet machines, watching neurons fire in patterns that mark hesitation, curiosity, or commitment. The timeline from those early ideas to modern neuroscience shows how our understanding shifted from metaphors to measurable signals. Why does it matter now? Because decision-making shapes almost every field that depends on human behavior. Economists study how people weigh risks, doctors look for patterns to understand disorders, and engineers design systems that respond to our choices with increasing precision. To imagine this landscape, picture a modern neuroscience lab. A calm room filled with soft electrical sounds, a volunteer seated under a scanner, and computers tracking tiny changes in the brain's activity. Each line on the screen carries a fragment of a story about how thoughts turn into actions. What does all this reveal? It shows that the act of choosing is not a simple command from the mind, but a layered process involving memory, prediction, and internal signals that interact in real time. Think of making a decision as standing at a fork in a quiet path. Before you choose a direction, you take in the light, the distance, and the feeling of the ground under your feet. Your brain works in a similar way, gathering signals from the senses and the body before anything reaches conscious awareness. A simple analogy helps. Each group of neurons casts small, continuous votes in favor of one option or another. When enough votes accumulate on one side, the decision crosses a threshold, and you experience it as choosing. The technical description is more precise. A decision arises from the coordinated activity of neural circuits that integrate incoming information over time. These circuits compare predictions, evaluate expectations, and gradually increase the strength of one possible action until it becomes dominant. This process does not happen in one place. Different areas of the brain work together, with some regions estimating rewards, others tracking uncertainty, and others preparing movements. The final choice emerges when these interacting signals settle into a stable pattern that the brain can act on. Scientists have spent decades trying to observe the exact moment a decision forms, and the results are surprisingly measurable. One of the clearest findings comes from experiments where people must choose between two simple options while their brain activity is recorded. Even when the choice feels instant, the build-up toward that choice starts a short time earlier, in small waves of electrical activity that rise like a quiet tide. This early signal shows that the brain prepares before the mind becomes aware of deciding. Another observation comes from measuring how long the brain takes to compare information. A typical neuron can fire around 10 to 50 times per second, but decisions often require the combined activity of thousands of neurons. When researchers track these patterns, they find that difficult choices take longer, not because we hesitate, but because the brain needs more time to integrate competing signals. This timing difference, often just a fraction of a second, reveals how the brain balances speed and accuracy. A third piece of evidence comes from reward-based tasks. When people choose between a small immediate reward and a larger delayed reward, the brain's reward centers show clear shifts. If the reward is larger, the signal is stronger. If it is smaller, the signal is weaker. This scaling effect helps explain why we sometimes choose long-term benefits and other times fall back on quick, simple satisfaction. A fourth finding involves uncertainty. Researchers show people blurred images or ambiguous shapes, then record which brain areas respond. The more uncertain the image, the more strongly certain frontal regions activate, almost as if the brain is saying, "I need more information before I commit." This activity pattern appears even when the person insists that the decision felt obvious. A final example comes from simple reaction time tasks. Imagine pressing a button when you hear a sound. Most people respond in about 200 to 300 milliseconds, which is roughly the time needed for sensory input to travel, be interpreted, and trigger an action. This short window shows how efficiently the brain transforms incoming data into movement, even under pressure. What do these observations mean? They show that decision-making is not a mysterious spark, but a measurable process with clear steps. Small signals accumulate, comparisons form, and patterns stabilize until one choice outweighs the others. The science is still developing, but each experiment adds a clearer piece to the puzzle. At first glance, these findings may look like proof that the brain decides before we do, but the cautious view says something more modest. The null hypothesis reminds us that early neural signals do not automatically mean a final decision has been made. They might simply reflect preparation, noise, or background activity that only sometimes leads to a choice. One alternative explanation suggests that these early signals are not decisions, but probabilities. In this view, the brain constantly updates likelihoods, much like a weather forecast shifting through the day. A small rise in neural activity may indicate growing confidence rather than a committed choice. This interpretation works well for ambiguous tasks, but struggles to fully explain rapid, deliberate decisions made under pressure. Another explanation focuses on habitual patterns. Some researchers propose that many decisions follow routines built from past experiences. According to this idea, the brain is not evaluating every option from scratch, but reactivating familiar pathways that were shaped long ago. This fits everyday behavior, such as choosing the same morning drink, but it does not fully account for moments when we break habits and try something new. A third interpretation argues that decision signals appear early because the brain prepares multiple actions in parallel. This parallel processing model suggests that the brain keeps several plans active, allowing quick shifts if the environment changes. It explains flexibility and speed, but it leaves open the question of how one plan becomes dominant while the others fade. How do these alternatives compare? Each one captures a part of the process, offering insight but not closure. The probability model explains uncertainty, the habit model explains efficiency, and the parallel model explains adaptability. Yet none of them independently matches all of the observations we see across experiments. So which explanation aligns best with current evidence? Most researchers lean toward an integrated view in which the brain accumulates information, adjusts probabilities, reactivates learned patterns, and evaluates options simultaneously. The final decision appears when these processes converge into a stable signal that crosses a threshold for action. This combined model is not perfect, but it fits more data than any single theory alone. Even with modern scanners and advanced algorithms, our understanding of decision-making faces clear limits. The first limit comes from the speed of neural events. Neurons communicate in milliseconds, but our tools often capture activity in windows that are far slower. This gap means we see the general pattern of a decision forming, but not the full precision of its moment-to-moment dynamics. A second limit comes from spatial resolution. Brain regions contain layers, microcircuits, and cell types that work together with extraordinary complexity. Most imaging tools can only observe large populations of neurons rather than individual cells. As a result, small but important interactions remain hidden within larger signals that blur the fine details. A third limit relates to sample sizes. Human decision studies usually involve dozens of volunteers, not thousands. This makes the results solid enough to identify broad patterns, but too small to capture the full diversity of how people think. Individual differences in memory, experience, and motivation can shift results in ways current studies cannot fully separate. Another challenge concerns the design of controlled laboratory settings. Many experiments require participants to choose among simple visual items or basic rewards. Real decisions in daily life involve emotion, uncertainty, social factors, and long-term goals, all at the same time. Our instruments function effectively in controlled environments, but have difficulty capturing the complexity found in real-world choices. What kind of experiments could close these gaps? More advanced neural recordings with higher temporal resolution would reveal how fast the brain transitions from uncertainty to commitment. Improved imaging that can track smaller clusters of neurons would show how microcircuits coordinate to produce a single choice. Larger studies across varied populations would help separate universal principles from individual differences. And combining real-world decision tasks with portable neural devices could bring laboratory precision into natural environments. What does this make clear? The limits are significant, but not discouraging. They act as reminders that our instruments shape what we can see and what remains invisible. Better tools will narrow the gap, but for now, many aspects of decision-making remain just beyond our scientific reach. If the current scientific model of decision-making proves accurate, the impact would stretch far beyond laboratories. One clear area is medicine. A better understanding of how the brain forms decisions could help identify early signs of disorders, such as depression, addiction, or compulsive behavior. These conditions often involve disrupted decision circuits, and clearer models could guide treatments that restore balance rather than simply suppress symptoms. Another impact appears in technology. Machine learning systems already predict choices based on patterns, but they still lack the subtlety of human decision-making. If neuroscience can map how the brain weighs uncertainty and reward, future systems may become better at assisting rather than replacing human judgment. This could reshape fields like navigation, finance, and personalized education, where decisions must adapt to complex and shifting environments. A third influence reaches everyday life. Most people assume their choices come from a single, unified intention. Yet the evidence suggests a slow accumulation of signals shaped by context, memory, and expectation. Understanding this process can improve how we design workplaces, schedules, or even personal habits. Small changes in environment or timing can shift decision patterns in predictable and helpful ways. However, these possibilities come with risks. One risk is overinterpretation. If early neural signals are mistaken for final decisions, people might wrongly assume that intentions or preferences can be read with absolute certainty. This misunderstanding could lead to ethical concerns in fields such as advertising, criminal justice, or employment. Another risk is the illusion of control. When people learn that choices arise from neural processes, some may believe that free will disappears. But the evidence does not support such a strong claim. It only shows that choices have measurable components. Misinterpreting this relationship could lead to fatalistic thinking rather than deeper understanding. There is also the danger of reducing complex human behavior to simple patterns. Decisions emerge from layers of experience, culture, biology, and context. Any model that ignores this richness risks creating solutions that work well in theory but fail in real life. What does the balance look like? The potential benefits are significant, but they require careful communication and thoughtful application. When handled responsibly, the science of decision-making can deepen our insight without stripping away our sense of agency. It can help us make better tools, healthier habits, and more informed choices, without assuming that everything can be predicted or controlled. The search to understand how the brain makes decisions leads to a basic conclusion. The brain functions as a system that collects information, compares possibilities, and gradually moves toward one option. The process contains measurable components, but it requires careful interpretation. When examined clearly, it becomes evident that many choices develop through changes in memory, expectation, and attention. This view does not diminish human behavior. It shows that ordinary decisions reflect accumulated experience formed over time. It indicates that the boundary between instinct and intention is narrow. The main question that follows is straightforward. If choices arise from these patterns, it is necessary to determine how much influence we have over them and how much they influence us. This question does not have a single answer. It requires continued observation and systematic analysis. If you found this topic intriguing, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comment.